When my daughter Meredith called me last October and begged me to move into her house in Barrie, I thought God was finally answering my prayers. I've been rattling around my old bungalow in Sudbury for 3 years since my wife Lorraine passed, eating canned soup and talking to the dog more than any human being. But every Sunday night at exactly 10 o'clock, I started hearing something through the heating vent in my bedroom, a sound no father should ever have to hear. And when I finally crept downstairs and pressed my ear against the locked basement door, what I discovered about my daughter's husband made me realize that the life she'd been showing me was a lie, built on fear. Before I get into what happened next, drop a comment below and tell me where you're watching from, because what my family went through could be happening to someone on your street right now. I should start from the beginning. My name doesn't matter much. What matters is that I'm 71 years old. I spent 42 years as a millwright at the nickel plant in Sudbury, and I raised Meredith on my own after Lorraine's first cancer scare when Meredith was only 9. Lorraine survived that round, thank the Lord, but the treatments left her bedridden for long stretches, so I learned to braid hair and pack lunches and sit through parent-teacher conferences with grease still under my fingernails. Meredith grew up strong, got her teaching degree from Laurentian, landed a position at an elementary school in Barrie, and married Gavin Flett, a mortgage broker who drove a black Audi and wore suits that cost more than my monthly pension. They bought a 4-bedroom house near the waterfront on Kempenfeld Bay, the kind of place with a double garage and stone countertops and one of those fridges that tells you when you're low on milk. When Lorraine finally lost her battle 3 years ago, Meredith drove up for the funeral and stayed a whole week. She cooked, she cleaned, she sat with me on the porch watching the October leaves come down. But I noticed things. She flinched when her phone buzzed. She excused herself to answer Gavin's calls in another room. And when she came back, her eyes were always a little redder than before. I didn't say anything. A father learns when to push and when to wait. The call came on a Tuesday evening. I was sanding the legs of an end table I'd been building in my workshop when my cell rang. "Daddy, Gavin and I have been talking. We want you to come live with us." "Sweetheart, I'm managing just fine up here." "Dad, you're 71. You had that dizzy spell last spring. What if you fall on the ice and nobody finds you till morning?" Her voice cracked, and I felt the loneliness of 3 winters press down on my chest. She put Gavin on the phone. His voice was smooth, confident. The voice of a man who closed deals for a living. "We've got the whole basement suite set up for you, sir. Private bathroom, your own entrance. Meredith would sleep better knowing you're close. And honestly, I'd appreciate having another man around the house. Someone with real-world experience, not just spreadsheets and interest rates." He said all the right things. Every single one. I sold the bungalow through a realtor Gavin recommended. Got a fair price, deposited the proceeds into my RRSP and TFSA at the credit union in Sudbury, and drove south on Highway 400 with my dog Barkley and a truck bed full of hand tools. The first 2 weeks were something out of a dream. Meredith had turned the basement into a proper apartment. New carpet, a little kitchenette, even a framed photo of Lorraine on the nightstand. Every morning I'd come upstairs to the smell of coffee and bacon. Meredith would be at the stove in her housecoat, humming along to the radio, and she'd kiss my forehead like I was the one who needed looking after. Gavin left early for his office in downtown Barrie and came home around 7, loosening his tie as he walked through the door. He'd ask about my day, pour me a rye and ginger, and sit with me watching the Leafs game. He even took me to Canadian Tire one Saturday to pick out a new workbench for the garage. "Your father's a gem," he told Meredith at dinner one night. "I wish my old man had half his work ethic." Their daughter, little Rosie, had just turned 4. She'd climb into my lap after supper and demand stories about moose and mining trucks. I hadn't felt this useful in years, but paradise has a way of showing its cracks if you're paying attention. By the 3rd week, Meredith's morning humming stopped. She moved around the kitchen like she was counting her footsteps, checking and rechecking things. The coffee had to be exactly the temperature Gavin liked. The eggs couldn't be too runny or too firm. His lunch had to be packed in a specific order: sandwich on top, apple on the left, napkin folded once, not twice. I asked her about it one morning after Gavin left. "You seem tense, sweetheart. Everything okay with you and Gavin?" "I'm fine, Daddy. Just busy." Report cards are coming up. But report cards don't explain why a woman wears long sleeves in a heated house or why she jumps when a cupboard door closes too hard. The first Sunday night, I heard it. My basement bedroom sat directly below the main floor living room, and the old forced air heating system carried sound through the vents like a telephone wire. At exactly 10 o'clock, after Rosie was asleep and the house had gone quiet, I heard Gavin's voice. Low, controlled, deliberate, not yelling. Something worse than yelling. A tone that turned words into weapons. I couldn't make out every phrase, but I caught enough. Fragments floated down through the ductwork like poison. Embarrass me in front of the Hendersons. Can't even hold a conversation without making me look stupid. Then Meredith. Barely a whisper. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to." "You never mean to. That's the whole problem, isn't it?" Then a sound I will never forget. A dull, heavy thud followed by a gasp. Then silence. Then quiet. Crying. I sat up in bed, my heart slamming against my ribs. Every instinct told me to charge upstairs, put my fist through his jaw, and carry my daughter out of that house. But 42 years in the plant had taught me something about dangerous situations. You don't rush into a room where the machinery is still spinning. You shut it down first, or someone else gets hurt. I lay awake until 4 in the morning, staring at the ceiling, listening for more. Nothing came. Just the furnace cycling on and off, and Barkley snoring at the foot of my bed. Monday morning, Meredith served breakfast like nothing had happened. But she moved stiffly, favoring her left side. And when she reached for a mug on the top shelf, her sleeve rode up just enough for me to see a bruise, the color of a ripe plum, circling her forearm. "Bumped it on the car door," she said before I could ask. "I'm so clumsy lately." Gavin breezed through the kitchen, kissed her temple, and told me there was a good documentary about the Group of Seven on CBC that evening. Charming, thoughtful, the perfect son-in-law. I wanted to be sick. The following Sunday, 10 o'clock sharp, the same routine. This time I pressed my ear directly against the heating vent and heard more clearly. Gavin's voice was almost calm, which made it more terrifying than any shouting. "You think your father notices? He's an old man, Meredith. He doesn't notice anything. He's just happy someone feeds him. Please, Gavin. Not tonight. Rosie's just down the hall." "Then keep your voice down." Another thud. A muffled cry. Then the sound of a door locking. I sat on the edge of my bed with my fists clenched so tight my knuckles ached. He thought I didn't notice. He thought I was just a grateful old man eating his daughter's cooking and watching hockey, too slow and too simple to see what was happening above my head. He had no idea who he was dealing with. I spent that week watching. In 42 years at the plant, I'd supervised hundreds of workers. I knew how to observe without being seen, how to document problems before filing a report, how to build a case that management couldn't dismiss. I applied every one of those skills now. Monday, Meredith wore a scarf indoors despite the thermostat reading 22 degrees. She said she was coming down with something. Wednesday, Gavin criticized the way she'd loaded the dishwasher, called her incompetent in front of Rosie. The little girl went quiet and stared at her cereal. Thursday, I offered to pick Rosie up from daycare. Meredith looked panicked. Gavin handles the schedule. He doesn't like changes. Friday, I heard him on the phone in the garage, speaking to someone in a low voice. The old man's got about $400,000 between the house sale and his pension savings. Once we get him on the joint account, it's straightforward. My blood went cold. He wasn't just hurting my daughter. He was planning to rob me. That night, lying in the dark, I spoke to Lorraine the way I always do when things get hard. "Tell me what to do, sweetheart. Tell me how to save our girl." And I swear, I heard her voice, clear as Sunday morning bells. "You already know, you stubborn man. You've always known. Think before you act. But don't think so long that you fail to act at all." Saturday morning, I waited until Gavin took Rosie to her swimming lesson at the YMCA. I found Meredith in the laundry room, folding towels with mechanical precision. "Meredith, I need to talk to you." She turned around, and I saw fear flash across her face before she could hide it. "I know what's happening, sweetheart. I hear it through the vents on Sunday nights, and I've seen the bruises you keep covering up." The towel dropped from her hands. She sank against the washing machine and started crying, not delicate tears. Deep, wrenching sobs that shook her whole body, the kind of crying that comes from years of holding everything in. "Daddy, you can't say anything. He told me if I ever told anyone, he'd take Rosie. He said no court would give custody to a teacher making $50,000 a year when he makes 3 times that. He said he'd tell them I was unstable." I knelt down beside her, my bad knee screaming, and took her hands. "Listen to me. I didn't raise you to live like this, and I didn't survive 42 years underground to watch my daughter be broken by a man in a suit. But we have to be smart. Can you do that with me? Can you be smart about this?" She wiped her eyes and looked at me. And behind the fear, I saw something I recognized. The same stubbornness that got her through university on student loans and waitressing shifts. The same steel that Lorraine carried through 2 rounds of chemo. "What do we need to do?" she whispered. "First, we need evidence, real evidence, not just my word against his." Over the following 3 weeks, Meredith and I became the most careful team in Barrie, Ontario. I bought a small voice recorder from Staples and showed her how to keep it in her cardigan pocket during his evening tirades. The recordings were devastating. Gavin's calm, methodical cruelty documented in his own voice. "You're nothing without me. Who's going to want a used-up schoolteacher with a kid and a senile father? Nobody, Meredith. Nobody." I photographed her injuries each morning, time-stamped, and stored on a USB drive I kept locked in my toolbox in the garage. Purple and yellow bruises on her arms, a handprint on her shoulder, a split lip she'd blamed on bumping into the bathroom door. While Gavin was at work, I searched his home office carefully, wearing gloves like they do on those crime shows Lorraine used to watch. What I found made my stomach turn. He'd been researching power of attorney forms. He'd printed out information from the Ontario government website about capacity assessments for elderly relatives. He had a folder labeled Graham Sr., with notes about my pension amounts, my RRSP balance, and the proceeds from my house sale, numbers he could only have gotten by intercepting my mail or accessing my accounts. There was a draft email to a lawyer asking about the process for becoming a substitute decision-maker for an aging parent-in-law, showing signs of cognitive decline. I didn't have cognitive decline. I had 20/20 vision into exactly what this man was. I called the Barrie Police Service non-emergency line from a payphone at the Maple View Center. I didn't trust that Gavin hadn't put something on my cell phone. A detective named Nina Kowalski took my call. "Mr. Tremblay, what you're describing is serious. We need documented evidence before we can act. Can you bring what you have to the station?" I drove there the next morning while Gavin was at work and Meredith was teaching. Detective Kowalski was a small woman with sharp eyes and no patience for nonsense. She listened to 3 of the recordings, looked through the photographs, and set her jaw. "This is enough to start a file. But for the charges to stick, we need to coordinate with the Crown Attorney. I don't want him walking on a technicality." She connected me with a family lawyer named Patricia Liu, who specialized in domestic violence cases. Patricia's office was above a coffee shop on Dunlop Street, and she smelled like Earl Grey tea and determination. "Your daughter needs to apply for a restraining order. We'll file simultaneously with the criminal complaint. And Mr. Tremblay, I need you to get a capacity assessment done immediately. If he's been building a case that you're mentally unfit, we need a medical professional on record saying otherwise." Dr. Amara Osei at the Royal Victoria Regional Health Centre ran me through 3 hours of cognitive testing, memory recall, problem solving, spatial reasoning, the works. Her conclusion was unequivocal. "Mr. Tremblay, your cognitive function is excellent for your age. Significantly above average, in fact. There is absolutely no clinical basis for a capacity challenge." I kept that report in my toolbox next to the USB drive and the recordings. My evidence file was growing thicker by the day. The hardest part was acting normal. Every evening, I sat across the dinner table from the man who was beating my daughter and planning to steal my life savings. And I smiled and asked about mortgage rates and the Leafs' playoff chances. Gavin poured me rye and gingers and called me, "Sir," and told Meredith she'd outdone herself with the pot roast. The performance made my skin crawl. But I thought of Lorraine, who'd sat through months of chemotherapy with a smile so her daughter wouldn't worry. If my wife could endure that kind of pain with grace, I could endure this. 3 weeks into our evidence gathering, Meredith came to me in the garage with news that changed everything. "Daddy, I'm pregnant. 6 weeks." My hands went still on the workbench. Does he know? No. And I'm terrified to tell him. He said after Rosie that one child was enough, that kids are expensive and they ruin your body. The urgency doubled. We couldn't wait any longer. A pregnant woman being beaten by her husband, there was no more time for patience. Patricia Liu arranged for Meredith and Rosie to have a bed at the Women and Children's Shelter of Barrie. Detective Kowalski coordinated with the Crown Attorney's office. Everything was set for Friday evening. I spent that last Thursday night lying awake, running through the plan. Meredith would hand Gavin the separation papers when he got home from work. I'd be in the next room with my phone ready to call 911. Officers would be staged nearby. Meredith's emergency bag was packed and hidden in my truck, along with Rosie's favorite stuffed moose and enough clothes for a week. I prayed harder that night than I had since Lorraine's diagnosis. "Lord, give us strength. Give my daughter courage, and please keep that little girl safe." Friday came gray and cold, the way November does in Barrie when the wind comes off the lake. Meredith taught her classes, picked up Rosie, and came home looking like a woman walking toward something she'd been running from her whole marriage. Gavin walked to the door at 6:15, loosening his tie. "Something smells good. What's for dinner?" Meredith stood in the living room, separation papers in her hands. Her voice trembled, but she didn't break. "Gavin, I can't do this anymore. I want a separation." He set down his briefcase. Slowly. The way a man sets down his briefcase. Slowly. The way a man sets down a weapon before picking up a bigger one. "Excuse me. I filed papers. I want you to leave this house." His face changed. The charming mask dropped away, and underneath it was something empty and mean. He took a step toward her. "You think you can leave me? You think anyone's going to believe some hysterical teacher over me? I'll take Rosie. I'll take the house. I'll have your father declared incompetent and drain every cent he's. That's enough, son." I stepped into the room. I didn't shout. After 42 years of working around machinery that could kill you if you panicked, I'd learned that the quietest voice in the room is usually the most dangerous. "Sit down, Gavin. Stay out of this, old man. This is between me and my wife." "No, it stopped being between you and your wife the first time you put your hands on her. I've heard every Sunday night through the heating vents. I've recorded your threats. I photographed her bruises. And I've got your own emails about stealing my pension." The color drained from his face. "You're confused. You're a sick old man who doesn't know what he's. I also have a cognitive assessment from Dr. Osei at RVH confirming I'm sharper than most people half my age. And Detective Kowalski at the Barrie Police Service has had my evidence file for 2 weeks. At that moment, the front door opened. Detective Kowalski and 2 uniformed officers stepped inside. They'd been waiting in the driveway. "Gavin Flett, you're under arrest for assault causing bodily harm and uttering threats. You have the right to retain and instruct counsel without delay." Gavin looked at me with an expression I'll never forget. Shock, rage, betrayal, and underneath it all, the disbelief of a man who'd been outsmarted by someone he dismissed as irrelevant. "You did this," he said as they cuffed him. "You ungrateful. I protected my daughter, something you should have been doing." They put him in the cruiser. Meredith collapsed into my arms, sobbing. Rosie stood in the hallway clutching her stuffed moose, eyes wide. "Grandpa, where are they taking Daddy?" I picked her up and held her tight. "Somewhere he can learn to be better, sweetheart." The trial came 4 months later at the Ontario Court of Justice in Barrie. Patricia Liu presented everything: the audio recordings, the photographs, Detective Kowalski's investigation report, Dr. Draz Osei's capacity assessment proving Gavin's incompetency claims were fabricated, and the financial documents showing his plans to seize my assets through fraudulent power of attorney. Gavin's lawyer tried to paint me as a confused senior citizen who'd misunderstood normal marital disagreements, but when the judge heard the recordings, that argument disintegrated. Mr. Flett, Justice Carolyn McPherson said, looking at him over her glasses, you systematically abused your wife, terrorized your child, and plotted to defraud an elderly man who trusted you with his family. This court sentences you to 3 years in a federal institution, with a 10-year restraining order against all 3 victims. Meredith received full custody of Rosie. The house was hers. Gavin's assets were frozen pending restitution for legal costs and damages. His mortgage brokerage license was suspended. 6 months later, I'm sitting on the back deck of that same house in Barrie, watching Rosie chase Barkley around the yard while Meredith hangs laundry in the June sunshine. She's showing now, 5 months along, and the doctor says everything looks healthy. She named the baby a boy. She's calling him Lorraine's maiden name, Boyu, Little Beau. I moved my things out of the basement and into the main floor guest room. The basement apartment felt like a place where secrets lived, and we're done with secrets in this house. Last Sunday, Meredith made roast chicken with mashed potatoes and gravy, and we sat at the dining room table, the 3 of us, with Rosie saying grace the way her grandmother used to. Thank you, God, for this food, for Grandpa, and for keeping us safe. I had to look away so they wouldn't see me cry. Meredith reached across the table and squeezed my hand. I wouldn't be here without you, Daddy. You saved our lives. You saved yourself, sweetheart. I just made sure someone was listening. Standing up for your family is the hardest thing you'll ever do. It's harder than any shift underground, harder than any funeral, harder than sitting in a hospital waiting room wondering if the Lord's going to take the person you love most. But protecting someone who can't protect themselves is never the wrong choice. Real strength isn't about fists or money or fancy suits. It's about paying attention when everyone else looks away. At 71, I discovered I still had enough fight in me to take on a man half my age who thought he was smarter than everybody in the room. He wasn't. He was just louder. If this story sounds familiar, if you're hearing sounds through the walls that don't add up, if someone you love is wearing long sleeves in summer and flinching at loud noises, please don't stay silent. One phone call can change everything. One stubborn old man with a voice recorder and a toolbox saved 2 lives and an unborn child. God gave me the ears to hear what was happening, the patience to build a case, and the courage to stand in that living room and say enough. He also gave me Lorraine, whose strength runs through our daughter like bedrock under Canadian Shield. Share this story with someone who might need to hear it. Leave a comment about your own experience, because your words might be the thing that gives someone else permission to speak up. And if you haven't already, subscribe to this channel for more stories that remind us that getting older doesn't mean getting weaker. It means you've survived enough to know exactly what to do when trouble comes knocking. Last night, Rosie climbed into my lap after supper, the way she does every evening, and asked me to tell her a story about moose and mining trucks. Halfway through, she looked up at me with those big brown eyes and said, "Grandpa, are you going to live with us forever?" I kissed the top of her head and told her the only honest answer I had. As long as the good Lord lets me, sweetheart. As long as He lets me, sweetheart. As long as He lets me.